With a few pro forma statements, without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Before I deliver my opening remarks, I wanted to note that today the committee is meeting virtually, and so I want to announce a couple of pro forma reminders to the members about the conduct of this hearing. First, members should keep their video feed on as long as they are present in the hearing. Members are responsible for their own microphones. Please also keep your microphones muted unless you are speaking. And finally, if members have documents that they wish to submit for the record, please email them to the committee clerk, whose email address was circulated prior to the hearing. Well, good morning and welcome to our members and to our panelists. Thank you all for joining us today. Collaboration is the lifeblood of scientific discovery. Scientists build on one another's work across time and around the globe. Openness in science allows reproduction and replication of work, increasing the reliability of conclusions and building public trust. It fosters cooperation across disciplines, brings in new perspectives, and sparks ideas that wouldn't come from any one solitary lab or even one country. The COVID-19 pandemic has driven home the importance of international collaboration in science. In those early months before the virus had been detected on our shores, American scientists and health authorities around the world were dependent on researchers in impacted countries to share what they knew about the virus, how it spread, and how it killed. Over a year in, the collaboration with international partners is still vital to detect emerging variants as early as possible and to assess vaccine efficacy. International problems require international solutions, and there are real costs to closing off your research from the rest of the world. In the House Science Committee, we recently held a subcommittee hearing on the origins of the coronavirus. At the time, a potentially very significant fact was that the closest known relative of SARS-CoV-2 was a bat virus from southern China, which had been studied at the Wuhan Virology Lab. Since then, it appears that closer relatives have been identified by an open international collaboration in bats from caves in Laos. If that discovery had been made by an open collaboration with access to bat virus samples throughout the world, it would have been a triumph for international science that would have strengthened China's claim that their lab's activities were not the source of the pandemic. However, because of China's insistence that only a closed and controlled investigation of the pandemic's origin could take place, and rejecting participation by even the World Health Organization, then serious questions will remain, questions that can only be resolved by a full and open international collaboration. And beyond just the pandemic, we can thank the openness of the research enterprise for groundbreaking discoveries in many areas. At Fermi National Accelerator Lab, where I spent 22 years working as a particle physicist, for most of that time, we held the dominant position because of the technology of Fermilab's Tevatron, the world's first giant superconducting particle accelerator. But we did not keep that technology to ourselves. We shared it with the scientific public and welcomed its use to build similar particle accelerators, first at DESY in Germany, and then the CERN Large Hadron Collider, the current world record holder. We also benefited from the use of anti-proton cooling technologies that were developed both in CERN and in Russia. And the experiments were performed with international collaborators from dozens of countries. Together, we improved our understanding of the universe with the discovery, among other things, of the most massive elementary particle, the top quark. This work continues at the CERN Particle Collider, and CERN is making significant contributions to Fermilab's world-leading LBNF Dune neutrino program. Fermilab and CERN were created in the depths of the Cold War. Fermilab's founding director, Bob Wilson, was forever proud of the fact that the very first experiment performed at Fermilab in the depths of the Cold War included Russian collaborators. But politicians tend to see everything through the lens of international competition. When pressed by a senator at a hearing to explain exactly what Fermilab's research into subatomic particles had to do with national defense, the issue for the Cold War, Bob Wilson famously replied that Fermilab's research has nothing at all to do with national defense, except perhaps to make our nation more worth defending. Words we could bear in mind today. But not all technology is created equal. While the discovery of the top quark and the Higgs particle do not seem to have any near-term military or commercial applications, the same is not true of the latest breakthroughs in artificial intelligence, gene editing, or quantum cryptography. As we will hear today from our panelists, openness does come with risks. Foreign adversaries can take advantage of it, investing in programs that incentivize researchers to exfiltrate sensitive information to get a leg up on a competitive research or commercial environment. While classified research is protected through existing mechanisms, we still do not have a comprehensive understanding of what the risks are to fundamental research and how to draw that line. Today's panelists will share their perspectives on the risk awareness within the scientific community and how the federal government can do a better job of protecting taxpayer-funded research from improper exfiltration. It's a crucial discussion that must bring together the science, law enforcement, and intelligence communities to come to a common understanding of the threat and the appropriate response. And we must not let the solution be worse than the problem. International collaboration and welcoming scientists from around the world has long been key to the United States scientific leadership. The United States attracts the largest share of international students worldwide, and 3/4 of them stay in the U.S. a decade after graduation and contribute to our economy. However, even before the COVID-19 pandemic, enrollment of international students was on the decline. And creating a hostile environment for foreign-born researchers will only exacerbate the problem. Asian American advocacy groups, scientific societies, and universities have raised the alarm that prosecutions related to academic espionage seem to have disproportionately targeted researchers of Chinese descent. A recent white paper found that defendants with Chinese surnames were twice as likely not to be found guilty or to have all charges dropped as compared to those with Western names. I'd like to ask unanimous consent for a summary of this white paper to be entered into the record. Hearing none, so ordered. And now we know China invests money in incentivizing researchers to hide connections to Chinese institutions and to improperly use grant funding to benefit Chinese institutions. This behavior is wrong and must be investigated and, where appropriate, punished. However, we must not create a hostile environment for scientists who want to relocate to the United States to work at our world-class institutions and bolster our national competitiveness. So I look forward to hearing from our distinguished panel about the current landscape of threats to research and security and ideas for responding to it. I believe the Science Committee is the perfect place for this discussion, since I hope we understand the value of collaboration in science and can take very seriously any threat to our national competitiveness. And I will now yield to Ranking Member Obernolte for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Chairman Foster and Chairwoman Stevens, for holding this very important hearing on research security. It's been a little over 3 years since the House last held a hearing on this topic, and we've had some interesting developments in the field since then. And so I think it's very timely and very appropriate that we're having this discussion. And this is something I think that is of fundamental importance to everyone on this committee, because we're overseeing the advancement of the frontiers of human knowledge, which I think is one of the most important things that government can catalyze. But at the same time, the culture of openness and transparency in research that we've built here in the United States also opens us up to being manipulated by malign foreign influences. And I think we would not be doing our duty as stewards of the American taxpayer money and as stewards of research integrity if we were not cognizant of the fact that that was possible and the guardians of the standards that prevent that kind of influence from occurring. We certainly want to continue to be the kind of atmosphere that welcomes students from foreign universities here to the great American melting pot. And I think that the integrity of the research that's done in the United States is vitally dependent on this rich tapestry that we've created of researchers from all over the globe. But also, we need to be aware and to be vigilant about the fact that this transparency, the transparency of our research system, also opens us up to the possibility that the research could be manipulated or used in ways that are contrary to our national security. So the question here before the panel today is how do we balance these two ideas that are in tension? You know, the one idea that we want to maintain this openness in our research community, but also this idea that we also need to be stewards of the nearly $45 billion that we invest every year in research at academic institutions, and that we need to protect our national security. And certainly, we want to do that in a way that's respectful to our research community, that doesn't unfairly discriminate on the basis of race, and that promotes the standards of openness and transparency that I think have made some of our research institutions the best in the world. So I thank again the chair and the chairwoman Stevens for holding this hearing this morning. I am very much looking forward to listening from our panelists and participating in the discussion. I yield back.
Thank you. And the chair now recognizes Ms. Stevens for an opening statement.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you to our Chair of Investigations and Oversight, Congressman Foster, and Ranking Member Obernolte, not only for your leadership in helping to host today's hearing, but your dedication to the topic of discussion. And I also want to thank the Ranking Member of the Research and Technology Subcommittee, Ranking Member Michael Waltz, for his continued leadership on the topic of discussion, which is balancing open science and security in the U.S. research enterprise. And of course, a big thank you to our very distinguished panel for appearing before the House Science Committee today. It's very clear that U.S. global leadership in research and development has long been a point of national pride here in our country. And I'm certainly especially proud of the state of Michigan's rich history in being a leader in groundbreaking scientific research, particularly at the university level. As a country, we have built the world's most successful research enterprise based on the values of openness and transparency, closely aligned with our democratic principles. Maintaining our nation's competitive edge in research depends on our commitment to equipping our greatest minds with the resources they need to continue to lead on the global stage. Our leadership also depends on our ability to identify, understand, and address emerging risks to our nation's research enterprise. In recent years, certainly concerns about the risks to the U.S. research enterprise from undue foreign influence have grown. Agencies at the federal level have reached out to universities and research institutions across our country to raise awareness about the threat of foreign misconduct. Federal agencies have sounded the alarm that some foreign governments, most notably from China, are carrying out a strategic and systematic campaign to undermine the integrity and security of U.S. research. For instance, the Chinese government has sought to boost its own research capabilities by exploiting America's openness to advance their own national interests. And the Chinese government sponsors numerous talent recruitment programs seemingly designed for the benign purpose of recruiting top talent. However, these programs often use coercive tactics that compel or incentivize U.S. researchers to be dishonest, maybe sometimes even commit grand fraud or steal intellectual property for the benefit of a foreign entity. And it's sometimes even just written into the contract terms. As chair of the Research and Technology Subcommittee, I'm committed to ensuring that American taxpayer research is not stolen by foreign competitors. And I also share concerns raised by my colleagues about the potential collateral harm to scientists and students who have acted with integrity and the harm done to our ability to continue to recruit talent from around the world. As we'll hear today from some of our witnesses, that the impacts to the people who are a part of the U.S. scientific research enterprise are wide-ranging, and we certainly recognize that we are in a global competition. We feel this every day here in Metro Detroit with our automotive industry, that we want to make and sell products all over the world. And I was raised in this climate of trying to prevent that type of espionage, certainly in our auto industry with foreign competitors, and that we are also in a global race for foreign talent, for global talent. And we want to make sure that we have the best and brightest minds. So we don't necessarily have a lot of simple solutions, but this committee has worked really closely with House Armed Services, the 2020 National Defense Authorization Act, saw provisions establish an interagency working group focused on identifying and raising awareness of research security risks and coordinating agency activities to address them. The Joint Committee on Research Environments, JCOR, has been very active and recently launched much needed guidance and best practices, which I hope we will be discussing today for universities and a set of agency policies and requirements. So we're certainly very proud of this committee's work in this space. It is a rapidly evolving issue and our work is not done. And we are glad to have the important thought leaders here today so that we can dig in further. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Thank you. And the chair will now recognize Ranking Member Waltz for an opening statement.
Hey, thank you. Good morning, Chairman Foster, Chairwoman Stevens, Ranking Member Obernolte. I'm really pleased that we're holding this hearing and wanted to thank you for it. We really need to examine the scale and scope of undue foreign influence on our research enterprise. And I look forward to a constructive discussion about how we ensure a balance, the balance that Ms. Stevens just mentioned. How do we maintain the spirit of open and academic collaboration, but we have to protect our proprietary technology and scientific discoveries from undue foreign influence. Through my service on the House Armed Services Committee and on this committee, I've been highly engaged on this issue. As Ms. Stevens mentioned, in 2019, we worked to get the Securing American Science and Technology Act included in that year's National Defense Authorization Act. And it authorized the Office of Science and Technology Policy's Joint Committee on Research Security, JCOR, as Ms. Stevens just mentioned. And we gave it the mission of standardizing federal agencies' approaches to research security. It also established the National Academy's National Science, Technology, and Security Roundtable, which Dr. Zuber with us today co-chairs. In last year's NDAA, I was again proud to have a provision included to ensure all federal research agencies require applicants to disclose foreign funding when receiving federal research awards. And by requiring grant applicants to disclose all sources of research support that they receive, this provision helps address a problem that GAO found regarding inconsistent conflict of interest policies across our agencies. Our agencies hopefully will now get on the same sheet of music with that provision. This year, we're working to get researchers the tools and information they need to understand how to identify and address research security threats. Working from a provision included in the NSF for the Future Act, I was able to add language to the NDAA that the House just passed to develop online security training modules for the research community focused on international collaboration and international travel, on foreign interference, and on the rules for proper use of funds, proper disclosure, conflict of commitment, and conflict of interest. These training modules will ensure that individual researchers understand what makes an appropriate partnership and the importance of accurate disclosures. And it sets a baseline for what is acceptable and unacceptable for future applicants. And frankly, in my view, it will help eliminate any excuses of I didn't know or I didn't understand. Working with Representative Feenstra, we also ensured this year's NDA included a ban on any federally funded researcher participating in any malign foreign talent program. We know that most of these talent programs already violate federal grant terms and conditions, but now there will be no question left for faculty members on whether or not participation is allowed. We carefully crafted the provision with stakeholders to ensure that legitimate international exchanges are still permitted. The open exchange of scientific ideas has long supported scientific progress, but some of these countries seek to exploit America's openness, as we've discussed already. The CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, has been the most aggressive, primarily through the use of talent recruitment programs, and notably of the 214 scientists the National Institute of Health have contacted between 2018 and 2021 regarding undue foreign interference cases. 90% of those cases involved activities based in China. Chinese communist leadership is targeting American scientists as a matter of state policy. That is clear. But of course, that does not mean that any type of racial profiling should ever be utilized to address this threat. We are not here to target researchers based on their race, but based on the actions that they have taken and their transparency or lack thereof with their federally funding agencies and sponsoring institutions. The U.S., I want to be clear, has absolutely benefited greatly from international scientific collaboration and the contributions of foreign-born scientists. And I want the U.S. to remain a desirable place for brilliant minds to come and share their ideas. But we cannot continue to allow this theft. And I fear that historians may look back and look back and say, what we're doing now may be too little and too late. So I'd like to thank our witnesses for taking the time to join us today and share their expertise. I look forward to your testimonies, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. And the opening statements of Chairwoman Johnson and Ranking Member Lucas will be entered into the record at this point. If there are other members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will also be added to the record at this point. And at this time, I'd like to introduce our witnesses. Our first witness is Dr. Maria Zuber. Dr. Zuber is Vice President for Research and E.A. Griswold Professor of Geophysics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where she is responsible for research administration and policy. In this role, she's responsible for intellectual property, research integrity, and compliance, as well as research relationships with the federal government. Dr. Zuber also serves as the co-chair of the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine's National Science, Technology, and Security Roundtable. Our second witness is Ms. Candace Wright. Ms. Wright directs the Government Accountability Office, GAO's Science, Technology, Assessment, and Analytics team. She oversees GAO's work on the management of federally funded research, intellectual property protection, and federal efforts to help commercialize innovative technologies and enhance U.S. economic competitiveness. She has led reviews on a wide variety of policy issues involving federal contracting, risks to the defense supplier base, foreign military sales, and homeland security. Our third witness is Ms. Allison Lerner. Ms. Lerner is the Inspector General of the National Science Foundation, a position she's held since 2009. In this role, she recommends policies for promoting economy, efficiency, and effectiveness of NSF programs and operations. She leads efforts to prevent and detect fraud, waste, and abuse, improve the integrity of NSF programs and operations, and investigate allegations of misconduct in science. Ms. Lerner has chaired the Council of Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency since January 2021 and has served as its vice chair from January 2015 through December 2020. Our final witness is Dr. Xiaoxing Shi. Dr. Shi is the Laura H. Carnell Professor of Physics at Temple University. Prior to 2009, he was Professor of Physics and Materials Science and Engineering at Pennsylvania State University. Dr. Shi was the recipient of the American Physical Society 2020 Andrei Sakharov Prize. Since 2015, he has advocated for open fundamental research and warned against the dangers of racial profiling. As our witnesses should know, you each will have 5 minutes for your spoken testimony. Your written testimony will be included in the record for the hearing. When you've all completed your spoken testimony, we will begin with questions. Each member will have 5 minutes to question the panel. And we will start with Dr. Zuber.
Okay, Chairman Stevens, Chairman Foster, Congressman Waltz, Congressman Obernolte, and members of the subcommittees. Thanks for inviting me to testify. I should say at the outset that the views I'll be expressing today are my own, and in particular, I'm not expressing the views of the National Academies as an institution or my co-chairs or participants in the National Science, Technology, and Security Roundtable, unless otherwise noted. The topic of research security is important because how we handle our scientific and technological rivalry with China will determine how prosperous and secure the U.S. will be in the future. And it's complex because we need to guard against China's improper activities without harming the U.S. scientific enterprise or cutting off collaborations that benefit us. Striking that balance requires the federal government and universities to be as clear as possible about what we're trying to prevent and what requirements are being imposed. Beyond outright theft and espionage, there are at least 3 kinds of activities that we should be trying to stop. First of all, China should not be allowed to pay U.S. faculty, especially not surreptitiously, to transfer work that is funded by federal grants or to recruit researchers for China or to spend time in China that conflicts with commitments to U.S. institutions. Second, research collaborations with China should be structured so that they are transparent and reciprocal, where each party has clear, legitimate benefits from their work. Third, universities should not enter into collaborations that would harm U.S. national or economic security or threaten human rights. To ensure that we focus on genuine concerns, federal agencies need to clarify reporting requirements, which too often have been conflicting and inconsistent. Fortunately, the administration is preparing guidance for implementing National Security Presidential Memorandum, NSPM 33. I have provided input to that process, and I am confident that the guidance will be helpful. The government also needs to be clearer about what constitutes a foreign talent program. Not an easy task, but the definition cannot be so broad as to capture legitimate or to prevent legitimate scientific work. What the government should not do is impose restrictions that will harm the US more than it harms China. The government should maintain the presumption, enshrined in policy since the Reagan administration, that research should generally be published openly. We should not have policies that broadly discourage Chinese graduate students from coming to the US. They strengthen our research capacity, and the vast majority remain after graduating. And policy should not broadly shut down collaboration with China at a time when they are getting ahead of us in some key fields and where there are global problems like climate change that are best tackled collaboratively. Universities, for our part, need to have policies that ensure faculty abide by disclosure agreements and ensure collaborations with China are reviewed. MIT put in place a strengthened review process in 2019 that I describe in my written testimony, and we have rejected proposed projects because of concerns, as I previously outlined. Each case has been different. While guidelines need to be clear, a sensible China policy still requires judgment. It's not a cookie-cutter process. That's why it's so important that the government and universities communicate regularly about these competing and evolving issues. That's also why the National Academy's National Science, Technology, and Security Roundtable, which this committee helped create, is valuable. The academies represent a neutral venue to have difficult discussions. One of the roundtable's priorities now is to get a better understanding of the scope and nature of the security problem in academia. The roundtable is working with law enforcement agencies to get the information needed to evaluate what percentage of faculty may be engaging in improper activities and how big of a threat they represent. One final point, US competitiveness depends less on defensive measures than on what we do to strengthen our own capabilities. Congress should increase research funding and channel some of it through initiatives like ARPA-H and the new directorate at the National Science Foundation. The heart of US strategy must be to look ahead and invest in our future. We are likely to trip ourselves up if we devote too much time and attention, instead looking over our shoulders at our competitors. Thank you.
Thank you. Inspector General Lerner, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Foster, Chairwoman Stevens, Ranking Member Obernolte, Ranking Member Waltz, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I appreciate this opportunity to discuss the National Science Foundation Office of Inspector General's response to challenges posed to NSF by foreign government talent recruitment programs. My testimony today will focus on 3 points. First, it's essential for NSF to know when a researcher applying for a grant is a member of a foreign government talent recruitment program. Although membership in such programs is not illegal, NSF needs to know about a researcher's membership because some programs elicit unethical and possibly criminal behaviors. In exchange for funding and possibly a lab, the government exerts control over the researcher through contracts that cover her intellectual property, the types of research she conducts, and in some cases, where she conducts it and who works in her lab. Some contracts also contain significant penalties if the researcher fails to live up to her obligations. NSF can address the risk posed by these contracts if it isn't aware of a researcher's membership. The agency's policies contain broad disclosure requirements related to a researcher's current and pending support that clearly cover talent plan affiliations. A researcher's failure to provide all required information is not a minor matter. It distorts the competitive process, disadvantages applicants who play by the rules, and undermines the foundation's ability to make the best decisions about how to deploy its limited resources. Second, researchers who fail to disclose their membership in these foreign talent programs can commit grant fraud. My office has used its in-depth experience in combating grant fraud to address this challenge. The failure to disclose a researcher's membership is a potential false statement, which, if it occurs within the statute of limitations, is a basis for opening an investigation. In the cases we've opened, we've encountered situations where researchers are using federal funds to bring students at the foreign university they're affiliated with to this country, using federal funds to travel abroad to do work required by their talent plan, or receiving salary from federal awards while concurrently working for and being paid by their talent plan. Situations like these can result in criminal, civil, and/or administrative actions. We've also found situations where researchers have actually provided accurate disclosures to their institutions, in which case we close our investigation. In deciding whether to open a case, we do not consider or track a subject's race or ethnicity. We focus on a researcher's conduct. Was he a member of a talent plan when he submitted a proposal? Did he disclose that membership during the proposal process? Was the proposal funded? A researcher's ethnicity is not relevant to any of these issues. This new line of work has had a profound impact on our office's investigative portfolio. As of yesterday, such cases make up approximately 63% of our caseload. Finally, I'd like to discuss some opportunities and challenges I see in responding to threats posed by these programs. I see an opportunity in the application of data analytics to this challenge. Strategic use of analytics will help identify the magnitude of this problem and enable all parties responding to this challenge to focus their efforts on cases with the highest risk. Ensuring that NSF has adequate resources to address this issue is a significant challenge. NSF's Chief of Research Security Strategy and Policy has a very small office with a very large mission, and the growth of allegations related to undisclosed foreign affiliations has overwhelmed my office's small investigative staff. We don't have the resources we need to investigate all the allegations we receive. The greatest challenge I see is the evolving nature of this threat we are facing. In response to the United States' efforts to address the risks posed by these programs, government sponsors are using encrypted apps and implementing other changes to avoid detection of the true nature of their relationships with members. To succeed, our response to this challenge must be agile and creative. My office will use the full range of our investigative resources to respond to this challenge and safeguard the integrity of the Foundation's operations and investments in science. We look forward to working with NSF management, the National Science Board, and Congress to achieve this goal. This concludes my statement, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. And next is Ms. Wright.
Thank you. Chairman Foster, Chairwoman Stevens, ranking members Obernolte and Waltz, and members of the subcommittees. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss foreign influence in federally funded research. University science and engineering research is vital to the country's national security and economic interests. Science progresses through open communication among scientists and sharing knowledge and research results. However, law enforcement and intelligence agencies have warned that the openness of the U.S. academic research enterprise makes it a prime target for countries seeking to obtain access to U.S. research for their scientific, economic, and military gain. With federal research funding amounting to over $40 billion annually, safeguarding U.S. taxpayers' investment is critically important. While this issue is not new, Today, there's even greater international collaboration. At the same time, there are concerted and sophisticated efforts to access U.S. research and intellectual property, such as through foreign government talent recruitment programs. Participating in such programs is often seen as prestigious and a way to advance research. Some countries can create conflicts of interest for researchers, regardless of their citizenship, by obligating them to divert information about U.S.-funded research in exchange for salaries, lab equipment, and other incentives. Agencies and university grantees face the difficult task of striking a sustainable balance between fostering collaboration and ensuring sufficient security. Conflict of interest policies and disclosure requirements are tools that, used effectively, can help achieve the balance between open science and safeguarding U.S. research. Last year, GAO issued a report that examined conflict of interest policies and disclosure requirements. We looked at the Department of Defense and Energy, along with NSF and NASA and NIH, which make up the 5 largest grant-making agencies. Today, I will share 3 key insights from that work. First, NSF as well as NIH and NASA have agency-wide conflict of interest policies. These policies emphasize financial interest researchers should disclose to the university receiving the grant. However, agencies' policies do not fully address or define non-financial conflicts, sometimes referred to as conflicts of commitment. Such conflicts may include foreign academic appointments or access to lab space provided by foreign entities. In light of this, we recommended the 3 agencies define and address non-financial conflicts of interest in their policies, as this is a key step to identifying and mitigating potential foreign influence. Agencies concurred with our recommendation, and since our report, they're taking various steps to address, but have not yet fully implemented the recommendations. Second, we looked at monitoring and enforcement. Here we found that the 5 agencies heavily rely on universities to monitor and mitigate financial conflicts. Agencies collect information such as foreign collaborations that could be used to identify potential non-financial conflicts. The 5 agencies noted instances where researchers failed to disclose financial or non-financial information. We identified that each agency had at least one instance of a conflict of interest case involving foreign influence. At the time, NSF estimated that it had taken administrative action against nearly 20 grant recipients who had failed to disclose foreign ties. NIH said it had identified over 400 research of concern and referred some cases for criminal investigation. Third, we heard inputs from the research community on improving the response to foreign influence. Principal investigators emphasized the need for clear communications about the specific threats. A number of principal investigators said they were unaware of foreign talent recruitment programs and wouldn't know how to identify such programs. While agencies like NSF have issued reports, provided guidance, and conducted webinars and training on foreign influence, university administrators called for better information sharing and actionable guidance about the specific threats and risks, especially for those working on high-target research involving 5G, AI, and quantum computing. In closing, maintaining an open research environment that promotes collaboration and transparency will need to be balanced with considerations of foreign influence from countries seeking to undermine U.S. investment in leadership and R&D. Protecting U.S. research must begin with having a common understanding about the threat. An important first step is to start with clearly defining and communicating the types of conflicts that may pose a risk. If agencies want or expect universities to be part of the solution to address risks of foreign influence, agencies must provide the necessary information and tools in a way that resonates with how the research community operates. Leaving researchers to guess the nature and extent of the threat and how to identify and mitigate such threats is simply not prudent, especially given the national security and economic implications. This concludes my statement. I'd be pleased to respond to questions you may have.
Thank you. And next is Dr. Shi.
Chairman Foster, Ranking Member Obernolte, Chairwoman Stevens, Ranking Member Watts, and the members of the subcommittees. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. My name is Xiaxing Xi. I'm a professor of physics at Temple University. Like many first-generation immigrants, I hail from a foreign country. I was born in China and got my PhD degree there. In 1989, my wife and I came to this country because America offered the best opportunity to do science, and it was the most welcoming place in the world to foreigners. In the United States, our career flourished, our family grew larger, and we became American citizens. We are as proud as any other citizens to call America our home. I remember vividly a fine spring day 6 years ago. I was busy with my teaching, research, and my duties as chair of the physics department. At dinner time, I gave a public lecture for a science festival at an Irish pub, and then went to the airport to pick up my wife, who was returning from an overseas trip. My elder daughter was home from college for a few days, and my 12-year-old daughter was anxious about her dental surgery the next morning. By the time we made a plan to visit a famous Korean fried chicken restaurant, it was way past midnight. Little did we know that a few hours later, armed FBI agents would raid our house and take me away in handcuffs. Based on emails I had sent from my Temple University address, the federal government charged me for passing sensitive US company technology, a device called Pocket Heater, to China. The charges were totally false. I had never shared the Pocket Heater information with anyone in China. Almost 4 months later, after leading experts in my research field provided affidavits saying that the emails I had sent were not about the Pocket Heater at all, but my own widely published research, the government dropped the case. But our life has been wrecked. On that fateful morning, when I answered the loud knocks on my door and the FBI agents put handcuffs on me, when the agents point their guns at my wife and 2 daughters and ordered them to walk out of their bedrooms with their hands raised, I thought, why are they doing this to me? I haven't done anything that warrants this. This operation must cost taxpayers tons of money. Unfortunately, the exact same early morning raid scene was repeated for the University of Tennessee Knoxville professor An-Ming Hu, who was acquitted by a federal judge several weeks ago. And it was played out again for the Cleveland Clinic researcher Qin Wang, whose case was dropped by the DOJ in July. When the DOJ uses this much resource going after innocent Chinese scientists, we must ask, are they catching the real spies? Are they spending our tax money responsibly to protect our country? The problem is that law enforcement officials consider Chinese professors, scientists, and students non-traditional collectors or spies for China. We are presumed guilty until proven innocent. It is only a matter of time and chance that any scientist of Chinese descent may get the knocks at his or her door by FBI agents and be snatched away. Profiling Chinese scientists based on where they come from ruins people's lives. I know that personally. I'm sure Professor An-Ming Hu knows it as well. I have no doubt Professor Qin Wang knows it too. All Chinese professors, scientists, and students are not spies for China. They are contributors to America's economic security and national security. Most professors do fundamental research. As the NIH director has said, most of what we do in science, we publish it. Without any evidence that they have stolen for China, academics are being charged for failure to disclose their activities in China. Academic collaborations with China was once encouraged by the US government and the universities. Selections into the Chinese government talent programs were celebrated, just as selections into similar prestigious talent programs in other countries. Now, academics face the possibility of criminal prosecution for having responded to these encouragements. This is not fair. It has not always been clear what professors are required to disclose. When the policy towards academic collaboration with China has changed so abruptly, it is only fair to communicate the new policy clearly to everyone before throwing people in jail. So let me be clear. A policy that targets Chinese scientists and cracks down on openness in fundamental research does not protect America's research security. It makes the US less competitive in innovation and less attractive to talents around the world. It threatens the US leadership in science and technology. It must stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Shi. And at this point, we'll now begin our first round of questions, and the chair will recognize himself for 5 minutes. As we consider this rapidly evolving and complex issue, I think it's important to get a basic understanding of the many layers of accountability that we already have in the federally funded research ecosystems. Researchers themselves are expected to disclose all of their commitments to universities. We have the grant receiving institutions who must ensure their faculty are following all the disclosure requirements. We have the funding agencies themselves who are reviewing grant applications, receiving tips on potential infractions, and making referrals to the Inspector General. The Inspector General handles case of waste, fraud, and abuse and can recommend administrative remedies, disbarment or suspension, and can refer the case, if necessary, to the Department of Justice. And the Department of Justice can choose to move forward or not with criminal prosecutions. So there is a machine in place to do this job. And the question we're addressing is how well is it working and whether it needs a tune-up. I imagine that there may be a lot of overlap in these responsibilities, and it's important for all parties to have a clear understanding of their roles and the avenues for communication between them, as well as sufficient technical knowledge and advice to do their very difficult jobs well. Dr. Zuber, now wearing your hat as the MIT Vice President for Research, how do universities, by and large, understand their responsibilities when it comes to ensuring the compliance of their faculty and researchers to federal disclosure requirements? Do they see their roles primarily as shielding researchers from time-consuming and annoying government meddling, or do they over-amplify government reporting requirements out of fear of getting into hot water?
Yeah, so Chairman Foster, thank you for that question. So speaking for MIT, and since I'm in communication with so many of my colleagues at other institutions, we take this very seriously, and we want our faculty to comply, and I think faculty do want to comply. There has been, as you noted, a fair amount of, I'll say, confusion about what actually needs to be disclosed and how it needs to be disclosed. So agencies have had require the same different information in different places. Some require disclosures on their CV. Some require disclosures in their current and pending support. And so there have been inadvertent errors in disclosures, and I think that's very, very separate, and we need to separate that from real intent to deceive. So we have been we have added staff and have really intensified our outreach to our faculty so that they can understand what the requirements are. And we have encouraged, and certainly within the National Academy's Security Roundtable, have really encouraged trying to get the disclosures uniform to the extent possible across federal agencies, so that everybody can understand what their responsibilities are.
Thank you. And Inspector General Lerner, what type of issues might stay within the NSF for education, or what type of behavior might trigger an IG investigation? Is there enough clarity there as to where we should escalate?
I think the NSF's disclosure requirements are very clear, including the need to disclose, compensation like labs or other supplies that are non-monetary. We have a great partnership with the Chief of Research Security Strategy and Policy. When situations are properly disclosed, the issue is there for NSF to manage the risks associated with a researcher's membership in a foreign talent plan, to ensure that they can address any conflicts of interest, conflicts of commitment, or intellectual property considerations that arise out of that. When those matters have not been disclosed, then it becomes a question of possible fraud, and it is sent to my office for assessment. So we have a pretty clear vision of the two lanes of our offices, and we communicate well together to ensure that the CRISP gets the information that is appropriate for her response, and my office receives the matters that we should be addressing.
Thank you. And my time has expired, and I will now recognize Mr. Obernolte for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Foster, and thank you to our witnesses. It's been a very interesting testimony. I have a question for Dr. Zuber. I was interested in the framework that you set out of the three activities that any kind of disclosure should be required to stop. But I'm concerned that the nature, insidious nature of foreign influence over our domestic research might be a little bit more subtle and more difficult to stop. And let me give you kind of a hypothetical, and this is not based on anything in reality, but say we're talking about, some primary research into a physical phenomenon like superconducting magnetism, and say that, there's a body of research that's in the public domain. There is a body of research that's been conducted outside of the public domain in a foreign country. And then there's a body of research that's being proposed to be done here in the United States. If you're that foreign country, you have a vested interest in finishing the picture, if you will. That third piece of research that hasn't been done is of disproportionate benefit to you because you have this additional information that is not in the public domain. So that would seemingly violate the second of your requirements, where you say research activities should be structured to be transparent and reciprocal. Obviously, that's not transparent and reciprocal, but we have no way of knowing that a foreign country has access to that extra information because they've done private research. So how do you go about policing something like that?
Oh, that's incredibly difficult to police, and this is there's a lot of nuance in this situation that we don't understand. Of course, in the U.S. on the corporate side, there's research that goes on within industry that isn't known to the outside, unless we should be looking for organizations that have sort of a history of publication. So unless an organization is publishing results, that's the first way to do it. But if somebody isn't coming clean, then we just don't have a way to know that.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's an incredibly hard problem. Maybe because you're talking about intent, right? So maybe that goes to the intent of these grant applications, and trying to assess whether or not there is a disproportionate benefit to someone outside the United States when the taxpayers' money is spent on that kind of research. No,
it's incredibly difficult to tell. So in a university, the intention is openness. So it's that everybody is going to take what they have and they're going to put it in the public domain, and they're going to put it out there, while trying to protect their intellectual property. So of course, that's going to be taken care of. But if you have an entity on the other side that has things that isn't releasing, that's just incredibly difficult to get a handle on.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask about the science and technology risk matrix that's been developed by the Department of Energy. Do you think that is a good model that might be able to be utilized more broadly by the research community to assess the risk level of the research that they're doing?
Yeah, so I actually I'm a big fan of that risk matrix. So in the Department of Energy, the way that they've gone about it is they got the chief technology officers of their national labs together to try to define as narrowly as possible. Okay, so not saying everything in AI. Okay, but to actually define technologies that have progressed far enough or are on the way of progressing to the point where they could raise concerns about either national or economic security, and to try to define them as being problematic. So I actually think that's a really good model, because it's the people doing it are the people who understand the levels of technology that are problematic, and that's a good place to focus.
Sure. Thank you. And let me go to Dr. Lerner. I was interested in your testimony that when you said the NSF doesn't have the resources needed to effectively police this situation. So in your opinion, what resources would the NSF need to police this?
I can only speak to my statement was focused on the resources available to my office. And at this point, and I'll confine my answer to that, at this point, I think even if we doubled the number of people in our investigative office, we would still be hard pressed to keep up with the number of allegations that are coming in. These cases tend to be complex and time consuming. And we have, in responding to them, we have sorely tried our staff who are doing their level best, but working beyond their capacity. So even doubling, I think, would be difficult for us to do this, and certainly would not enable us to get to a point where we could do proactive assessments.
Sure. And I see I'm out of time. How many people in your staff, just quickly?
We have slightly over 20 total in our Office of Investigations, but some of those are investigative scientists who focus on research misconduct, so even fewer than that.
Okay, so 20 more bodies. All right, thank you very much.
It's a start.
I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Chair will now recognize Chair Stevens for 5 minutes.
Great. As we've heard today, it's not certainly just the Chinese government being unique in its efforts to undermine the U.S. scientific research enterprise. However, it does appear that the Chinese are the most active and best organized, and a major source of concern are the talent recruitment programs, the talent recruitment programs sponsored by the Chinese government. And Ms. Candace Wright, in your submitted testimony, you shared that government agencies rely on universities to monitor conflicts of interest. And then 6 of the 8 universities that the GAO interviewed did not know what these talent recruitment programs are or even how to identify them. And while a government-wide prohibition for federally funded researchers participating in such programs was passed in the House NDAA for the next fiscal year, could you share just a bit more about what is being done to increase the understanding of these programs in the research community and what impact you think this might have?
Certainly. Thank you for the question, Chair Stevens. So I would say for our work, we certainly heard from the research community, the researchers, they didn't have an understanding of these foreign talent recruitment programs. Some of these programs have actually been around in other countries, several countries around the world. And while some of them were not aware of it, they started to become aware when we started asking questions in our meetings with them, but then also through some of the outreach that agencies are conducting to build awareness around this broader issue of research security. There's certainly folks with whom we spoke with who noted that these programs sometimes can be really seen as prestigious. They're a way to advance research, advance careers, similar to serving on a board, for example. So there are lots of, professional benefits that come with it. And so what's really required now is to enlighten the community's awareness about the malign behaviors that may exist and using these programs as a way to get access to U.S. research. And so I think the continued training that is happening by the agencies, sharing information, with universities is certainly a step in the right direction, again, to enhance awareness and put some sunlight on it.
Great, thanks. And would anyone else like to comment on this topic as well?
Yeah, so
go ahead. Yep.
Chair Stevens, can I just add to that? Yeah, so it used to be that these foreign talent programs were considered prestigious, in the same way that some U.S. fellowships are, and now we're starting to find out that there's requirements associated with them. So as we get information on these talent programs, we have a website where we post all that information for our community, and we tell our students, anything that requires, providing information on what you're doing to somebody else, anything that requires signing a contract, you have to be extremely wary of. And but these, there's we now list them, the ones that are problematic. but new ones keep appearing, and they have to be vetted. So it's a matter of constant vigilance to really keep after these things.
Yeah, and Dr. Zubert, while I have you, could you give just an update on the status of the work? Just to backtrack, in January, the White House issued a national security policy memorandum directing agencies to take action to address research security risks. In August, Dr. Eric Lander, President Biden's science advisor and director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy, released a statement that additional guidance on implementation of the National Security Policy Memorandum would be available in 90 days. And just in your role as co-chair of the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, you have provided input to and reviewed the forthcoming guidance. Do you happen to have any update on this?
Yeah, sure. So they were open to. So the NSPM 33 memo came out right at the last waning days of the previous administration, and there were a lot of really positive aspects for it, such as harmonizing disclosure requirements across agencies and various things. But there was, I'd say there was a shortcoming. There was a lack of specificity. Universities were being asked to comply to certain things, and they weren't being told what they needed to comply with in sufficient detail that they could actually tell that they were compliant. So I provided input, but many university associations provided input as well in terms of what could help clarify that. And I reviewed the draft. Shortly after Dr. Lander published his blog, and it's still a work in progress. But I think that the issues that I raised and the recommendations that I raised, as well as those of the societies, as far as I can tell, they were taken to heart. And I think that what you're going to see.
We're a little over time, but we can get back to you on that.
Absolutely.
Thank you to the chair for obliging the overage, and we can yield back the time at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now recognize Ranking Member Waltz for 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to say at the start to Professor Xiaoxing, I want you to hear from me. Certainly, I am deeply sorry for what has happened to your family, what happened to you, and happened to your reputation. It's absolutely unacceptable. Regardless of what mistakes were made, to have your family at gunpoint for that type of even alleged infraction is just jaw-droppingly unacceptable. And I think I speak for a lot of my colleagues and want you to hear from us how unacceptable that is. Mr. Chairman, I just want to read very quickly and then submit for the record from the State Department's website, China's military civil fusion program, which, quote, is an aggressive national strategy of the CCP, a key part of which is to eliminate barriers between China's civil research and its commercial research and its military by acquiring the world's cutting-edge research through theft in order to achieve military dominance. I'd like to submit that for the record, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Ms. Lerner, you mentioned to Mr. Obernolte that your office is approximately 20, but not even every one of those 20 is dedicated to the type of grant theft and research fraud that we're talking about. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, the security office is right now an army of one woman, God bless her. So, while we may describe, the needs here as kind of a tune-up, I think we need a massive overhaul, because could you just elaborate on how the National Science Foundation IG caseload has changed over the last 4 years? Because I think I think we need to wrap our minds around shift in gears that's happened under Z and under Z-led CCP, particularly with some of the laws that he's put in place, that while these researchers may be fantastic individuals, great people, they are violating their law, and they are put in a no-win situation. And whenever the government taps them on the shoulder to give what they want, they have to do it. But just if you could talk to me about how your caseload has shifted in the last 4 years, and why or why not are you able to proactively pursue cases?
Thank you. I'd be happy to do that. We first became aware of the issues posed by foreign government talent recruitment programs very late in 2017. So prior to that, we didn't have any cases that we knew had any relevance to that particular issue. It turns out that there were a very small number of cases that we had prior to late 2017 that turned out to have talent plan ramifications. That wasn't the basis that we worked them on. It was a straight grant fraud, and the talent plan issue was not the source of the grant fraud there. But since becoming aware of the issues with talent plan memberships, our caseload has increased to the point where, as of yesterday, it's 63% of our investigative portfolio, and that's a huge growth in a very short period of time. And as I noted, these are not easy cases; they're complicated, and we want to make sure we gather the information that's necessary to prove or disprove an allegation.
Well, I appreciate the committee's work in helping get the security office more resources. I think we need to get you more resources. But I believe in a previous conversation, you said you had about 1,000% increase in referrals from the FBI. Is that
we
correct?
did. We did, in fact, yes. And at this point, just keeping up with the referrals for the requests for assistance from the FBI, which we routinely receive, but never at this magnitude, requires a full-time staff person.
Sorry, just for the, don't mean to interrupt you, for the sake of time. You've had 1,000% increase with things as they stand now. Now the committee's looking at doubling, or if the Senate has their way, tenfold increase in monies and grants, which I certainly support. But are you looking at an increase in resources from that 1,000-fold increase, and then on top of that, from the magnitude of what we're talking about? I mean, I just think this is a massive problem of scale that we're not fully dealing with here.
If the legislation that would increase the size of the agency by about $11 billion that's in the House would offer, over 10 years, would offer my office $50 million to focus on our work. So we are being considered, and we're very grateful for that.
That's fantastic, Mr. Chairman. I yield my time.
Thank you. And we will now recognize the chair of the Full Science Committee, Representative Johnson, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. This is a very, very important hearing, and I thank the leadership for getting right to it. The U.S. research enterprise has benefited enormously from a culture of openness and collaboration. The U.S. has also been a highly sought after destination for talented researchers and students around the world. What steps have agencies and universities taken to raise awareness and mitigate these risks? What does success look like, and what are the goals agencies and universities are working toward? And I guess I will start with Ms. Zuber.
Okay, thank you, Chairwoman Johnson, for that question. So we have, at my university and peer institutions, we have done active outreach to faculty. We have held town halls and forums. We have gone to departments. We have had individual meetings, and in particular, we have offered individual conversations and consultations with our Asian faculty, Asian and Asian American faculty who who feel targeted. I'll be clear about that. So we have so training has been a big part of it. We have also proactively been working with the federal agencies and providing them with our perspectives on how they could structure disclosures in a way that would make it easiest for our faculty to disclose. And so I just want to say here, though, universities aren't set up to be investigative. We're not investigative organizations. And so while we have staffed up, we don't have the sort of capacity that say Allison does. But those are the steps that we have taken. And what does success look like? We would understand well how to comply, and we would eliminate all these inadvertent non-compliances because we don't understand, and that we would be able to focus on the cases, and we would understand what the real espionage threats are, and go after them and let law enforcement prosecute those. But we wouldn't be making mistakes of confusing disclosures with actual intent to do harm.
Well, thank you very much. Ms. Lerner, can you comment?
Thank you. I think, if we're going to succeed in fighting this challenge, a critical piece of information to all parties involved is having access to the contract a researcher signs with a foreign talent agency. It's the terms of those contracts that pose the real risks to an organization. And I think it's essential for universities and for funding agencies to have access to them to be able then to determine what risks they pose and whether they are insurmountable or capable of being managed.
Thank you very much. I have one more minute. Can anyone else comment?
Sure, I'd like to jump in here, Chair Johnson. So I would say for GAO's part, we think another key thing that really needs to be addressed is to strengthen these conflict of interest policies that agencies have, so that the university community has a clear understanding about what the definitions are with regard to financial as well as non-financial conflicts, and what activities constitute those kinds of things and how they may pose a risk. We've made recommendations to the agencies to take action to clearly define those conflict of interest terms. We've seen some guidance come out from OSTP that includes that information. However, it's not required for the agencies to adopt it. And I think that that's something that's really important. It's actually an issue that when GAO first started looking at this issue of foreign participation in U.S. research back in 1992, we were talking about conflict of interest policies then and the need to strengthen it. And here we are today in 2021, still having that same conversation and making those kinds of recommendations.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. And we will now recognize Congress's other PhD scientist, Representative Baird of Indiana, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Foster and Ranking Member Obernolte and Chairwoman Stevens and Ranking Member Waltz. I appreciate this opportunity, and I appreciate the witnesses being here today. I guess I'm going to start off with the relationship with law enforcement and academia. And in that vein, I'd like to start with Dr. G and ask him, given your traumatic experience, do you have thoughts on how law enforcement and the Department of Justice can work with academia in order to gain a greater technical expertise and then hopefully avoid unnecessary situations like yours? So, Dr. Z.
Thank you, Representative Burt. And so I think what the law enforcement can do first is to abandon the assumption that all Chinese professors, scientists, and students are spies for China. And they are not. And so I think a lot of the problem, like a failure to disclose that has been discussed, if you abandon the assumption that these people are spies, then the if they made mistakes in filling their disclosure forms, and that's then they can correct it. And if anything that is out of not in line with the principles of open research, of what Chinese government is doing, you can point it out, and then they can correct it. So this, I think, is the number one thing they should be doing. And in terms of how to balance openness and security, I think that the JASON report, right, which was commissioned and endorsed by the NSF, has presented a fact-based solution that's very well balanced in openness and security. And it recommends that these kind of problems should be dealt with within the framework of research integrity. And I think if a failure to disclose occurs, university and the funding agencies should investigate it and deal with it. And only when it's really the case when law may be broken, then they should refer to the FBI. And I think that would be, in my opinion, the right way to do it.
Well, thank you for that. And I'm going to switch to all the witnesses on this question. The FBI has kind of shifted the way they collaborate with the universities in order to combat this foreign intelligence gathering. Specifically, they've set up the Office of Private Sector, which is a contact point for universities and corporations. All 56 of the FBI's field offices have at least one private sector coordinator. So in your opinion, is this an effective means to handle the problem? And what else could be done? And I think we'll start with Ms. Lerner.
Thank you, Representative Baird. And I think any efforts on the part of the FBI and law enforcement to increase understanding of these challenges and education about the risks and build communication capabilities with academic institutions is to be praised and of value.
Super. Thank you. Dr. Zuber?
Yes, so I agree with Allison that this is a positive step. It's a work in progress. What would really benefit is greater mutual understanding of how academia works versus how law enforcement works. They're different culturally, and so in academia, it's a very data-driven community, and they want to see evidence. Whereas in law enforcement, they tend to hold things tightly until there's an actual prosecution done or not. And so there's a disconnect there. And we've certainly been trying to work with the FBI and making progress towards what kind of information can we actually provide the academic community with so that we can better understand the risks that are there. And as we continue these conversations, I think this continues to improve.
Representative Baird, if there's one more point I could make.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I would just note that the Inspector General community, especially IGs at research funding agencies, are a great kind of intermediary between the professionals at the FBI and the academic institutions, because we are embedded within agencies that have a research-focused mission, and we understand law enforcement. I think we have a vital role to play in ensuring that those communications are as strong as they can be.
Thank you. Ms. Wright?
So I would just underscore what's been said in terms of making sure that law enforcement is providing information in a concrete way for the university community to understand, and presenting that information in a way that resonates and reflects the environment in which they operate. One of the things that we heard in the course of our work is that oftentimes law enforcement comes in and they speak in generalities, and which makes it really difficult for the universities to fully understand the scope and magnitude of the issue, but also more importantly, to have enough information to then share with their community of researchers, principal investigators and such. And so I think that that's something that's really needs to be for them to be mindful of, is how to present information such that people can really understand what the scope of the issue is and the nature of how these threats unfold and what their role can be to help in combating the issue.
Thank you. I can appreciate in many cases the research being conducted by the researcher is so specific that it would be difficult to illuminate all of that to law enforcement. So I see the challenge. I appreciate the work that's being done. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. And we will now recognize Representative Stansbury for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our chairpersons today for convening this very important hearing. I want to start by saying that it's critical as we move forward and continue the work of this community to ensure that the programs and funds that we're creating rise to the challenges of our times and continue to foster the kinds of international collaboration and research that really advance our science enterprise. Open data, international collaboration, multicultural exchange, and diversity in STEM are all essential ingredients to innovation in our science and technology enterprise and the social and economic well-being of our country and of our planet. In fostering these exchanges, it's paramount that we do not open our institutions to foreign influences and malign forces and continue to protect the safety and security of our communities. But we must also ensure that these security measures do not lead to unintended consequences that unnecessarily hamper international collaborations and lead to racial profiling and discrimination. My home state of New Mexico is a science and technology powerhouse and home to numerous federally funded research institutions, including 2 national laboratories, several Air Force research laboratories, and 2 public R1 research universities. These institutions and the researchers who make them up come from across the country and across the planet and are the cornerstones of our communities. The University of New Mexico and New Mexico State educate a diverse and talented student body and attract researchers from across the planet who produce critical research that enriches our nation and our competitiveness. And in fact, just this last month, our president recognized New Mexico's research leadership by naming NMSU's Dr. Dan Arvizu, who's a friend to this committee, to the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. Both of our universities are strengthened by their diversity, not just as Hispanic leading serving institutions, but also by the international students and researchers who bring their talents, their perspectives, and their ideas to our state and our country. The majority of these students and many of these researchers stay in the U.S. after completing their time and continue to contribute to research advances and, of course, to the cultural fabric of our communities. Our national labs and Air Force research labs also attract researchers from across the planet, and international exchanges are part and parcel of the work that they do every day. These labs and the work that they do in our communities and for our nation are helping to tackle our biggest challenges, from national security to global climate change. And so continuing to foster those international exchanges is not only paramount to the security of our nation, but also to our planet. So I look forward to continuing to supporting the committee's work to ensure that we implement safeguards that allow us to work with the international community in developing new research and technologies and continue to attract and welcome international students and researchers to come to our country and work in our country and to contribute to the scientific enterprise that will serve our national security and our global well-being. So with all of that in mind, and especially because our universities are oftentimes strapped by having challenges to access resources, I want to ask Dr. Zuber a question about university security. For smaller universities or those with less resources, in your opinion, what does the risk landscape look like? And are universities equipped to defend themselves? And how is the federal government helping to strengthen collaboration between universities to address these threats?
Yeah, so So, Congressman, thank you very much for that question. I was waiting for the opportunity to make this point. Making the most of research in the U.S. means getting everybody involved, and there are many, many, many institutions that are capable of participating in the research enterprise, and we need them all fully locked in. But it's all of the things that we've talked about in terms of disclosures and cybersecurity, all these safeguards, they require a level of sophistication, they require a lot of staffing, and they require a lot of resources. And so by putting these in place, it's actually an impediment to all universities, but particularly universities such as in New Mexico from participating in this. So what you heard a little bit about what the federal government is doing by harmonizing among agencies what they require for disclosures, and by providing guidance and best practices for so that universities have a clear idea of what they need to do to comply. That can be extremely helpful. And by setting up working groups that allow universities to share best practices is another thing that's important.
Thank you very much. And we look forward to continuing to work with you. And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. And we will now recognize our new colleague from Texas, Representative Jake Ellzey, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I won't need that long. As a new member, I appreciate you holding this hearing. I'd like to thank the guests that we have and their testimony, as well as the other ranking members and chairman. This is an important topic to be looking at, and it's very timely. And I appreciate all your input today. I have no questions, and I've learned a lot from this, and I appreciate the opportunity to be recognized. And I yield back.
Thank you. And we will now recognize Representative Tonko for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank both subcommittee chairs and ranking members for holding this very important hearing, and thanks to the witnesses for being with us today. The U.S. government relies on a robust, federally funded research enterprise to inform our most important decisions, from how to combat climate change to overcoming a global pandemic. So international students are fundamental, I believe, to the success of that research conducted at many of our nation's esteemed colleges and universities. Universities such as RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in my district, where international students make up 20% of undergrads and almost 50% of graduate students. These students and scholars come to America to study and work, obviously, but also hopefully stay to become Nobel laureates and founders of startup tech companies, contributing billions to the national economy, supporting hundreds of thousands of jobs, and deeply enriching the quality of scientific research. Just this morning, a Japanese-born American physicist at Princeton University was awarded a Nobel Prize for modeling Earth's climate and reliably predicting global warming. However, it is increasingly difficult for international students to get their education here, and there has been a decline in enrollment over the last several years. If we cannot attract that kind of talent, or if students and scientists don't feel comfortable engaging with their international colleagues, the U.S. leadership in science and innovation will indeed suffer. So while much of the discussion today is on maintaining the integrity and security of the U.S. research enterprise, I want to ensure we are not scaring away international scholars or causing a brain drain of catastrophic proportions. So Dr. Shi's written testimony included preliminary data showing that 43% of international students and early career scientists in physics perceive the United States as unwelcoming. I am worried about the impact that has on the mental health of international students and scholars working and studying here in the U.S. Dr. Shi, have you gotten the sense that scientists and students of Asian descent feel under attack or under increased scrutiny?
Thank you for the question. Absolutely. The policy to target Chinese scientists and crack down on open fundamental research has created an atmosphere of fear in the scientific community. You know, every time the DOJ charges a Chinese scientist when he or she has done nothing wrong or has made an error in disclosure forms, people are terrified. And they're afraid that they may be the next. And many are so terrified that they are afraid to talk about their fear. Right? This is not just for Chinese scientists, but scientists from many other countries. So let me give you an example. We are now signing an open letter identical to the open letter that 177 professors from Stanford has sent to Attorney General Garland about the China Initiative. And some told me that they fully support the letter, but out of concerns of the possible consequences, they will not sign it. Right. So, as you mentioned, this American Physical Society survey, 40%, that's a large percentage, see American as an unwelcoming country. And 40% say they are less likely to stay in the US long term. I mean, this is huge. This will cause the US to lose its leadership in science and technology faster than anything Chinese government can do.
Thank you. And given your experience, how would you advise Asian American or Asian immigrant students considering going into the sciences in the United States?
Well, we came to this country 30 years ago because this country, as I said, is the best place for science and the most welcome country in the world. And now we know that there are people in this country who want to change that. So, the freedom of movement is a fundamental human right. So people should decide where they want to live and work based on their best interest. However, if they decide or consider to come to the United States, they should realize the risks that Chinese scientists will face in this country. But on the other hand, America is a democratic society, right? We have the opportunity to speak up and to help to make this country a more perfect union. So, I have the opportunity to come here and speak to you and tell you that, the policy to crack down Chinese scientists and open science is bad for this country and injustice. So if they decide to come to this country, they should not just come here and do science and nothing else. They should be prepared to participate in the democratic process and, participate in the civil, like voting and things like that, and try to help to make this country a better place and change the policy that hurt this country.
And Dr. Zuber, you discussed the importance of encouraging and enabling Chinese students to stay in the U.S. after graduating. Are you concerned that this unwelcoming perception of the U.S. might reduce our ability to retain these students or fail to attract them to come in the first place?
Yes, I am, Congressman, and there is evidence that there have been decreases in Chinese students wanting to come to the U.S.
Thank you. I believe my time is up, Mr. Chair.
Expired.
That's back. Thank you.
Thank you. And we will now recognize Representative Meyer for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. I think the title is very appropriate, balancing an open society and security. It's about striking that right balance. And I appreciate all of our witnesses here today. I want to second Ranking Member Waltz's expression of apology to Dr. Shi for that treatment. Obviously, that is what happens when that balance is not being struck, when we err on the side of security without appreciating that we need to be balancing that imperative to make sure that we're providing for our national security with recognizing that scientific collaboration and research cannot be done in isolation. It needs to be done in a collaborative fashion. We need to have appropriate guardrails. And I also appreciate Director Wright, the GAO report along those lines. Here in West Michigan and in Grand Rapids, just about a half mile from where I'm standing, we have the Van Andel Research Institute, which is a fantastic medical and specifically cancer research institute. This has been a concern that was raised to me very early on in my time in Congress. how we can ensure that while ensuring that we are protecting for American security and ensuring that research being done here is not supporting international actors, but is being done to benefit the medical and research community writ large, how in that balance we don't ultimately cut off a supply of talented academics, of talented researchers who may be able to contribute to that ultimate goal. So I think it's critical that we strike that right balance. And on that note, Dr. Zuber, this was a bit covered in the GAO report, but when it's left up to the universities, the universities are not experts in counterintelligence. They may not be experts in the 1,000 Talents plan. This is not a capacity that they have on an individual basis. So, what are your recommendations to universities or research institutions on how to best conduct due diligence on potential Chinese or other foreign partners?
So universities themselves are not in a position to do this due diligence. We depend, whereas we assume that if a student gets a visa or a researcher gets a visa, that they have been vetted by authorities who have experience in doing that. It's our responsibility as universities to inform our faculty and our students about what the rules are for disclosure and the issues associated with foreign talent programs, that we explain to them and train them. But ultimately, we're going to assume and require people need to tell the truth. If we don't go in and we do spot checks on people, but mostly we're there to educate. To have individual discussions and go through people's background and CV and grant applications to make sure that they're doing things the right way. But we depend on honesty.
Thank you. And Dr. Zuber, I guess on that same point, when it comes to collaboration with law enforcement or with the FBI, I think of that old expression, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If we're coming from the lens of solely focusing on the counterintelligence angle, then what could be a simple clerical error or a lack of understanding of what required disclosure. And to your point, that's why the education component's important. But how do we have that right balance where something can get elevated, but doesn't automatically fall into pure intelligence, counterintelligence, that elevated level of concern and attention, but can be mitigated at a more appropriate level to what's being demonstrated?
Well, I just want to agree with what Dr. Shi said before. The law enforcement should be called in when a law is broken, not for filling out a form wrong. Okay, our researchers are desperately afraid that if they fill out a form wrong, that the FBI is going to show up at their doorstep, and that's not a winning strategy for us.
Thank you, Dr. Zuber. And Ms. Lerner, obviously China has been the focus of much of this, but could you speak to any other threat actors that you've seen in your experience that we have concerns about them utilizing our research apparatus for their own, foreign policy goals?
I'm aware that there are other nations of concern that have foreign government talent recruitment programs. Again, our focus has been strictly on the contracts, the nature of the contract, the contractual relationships. And I think that's why failure to disclose a relationship like that is not just a paperwork error. When a university is not aware of that relationship, and when a funding agency is, it doesn't have the opportunity to assess and be aware of and grapple with the risks posed by that. And that undermines the competitive process, and that puts funds at risk. So with all due respect, I want to counter the idea that failure to disclose is simply a paperwork error.
Thank you, Ms. Lerner. With that, my time is expired, Mr. Chairman.
Can I add a word? Excuse me.
Yes, briefly.
I think it's definitely important to have a clear rule about disclosure. However, overemphasize on disclosure, send a message that don't collaborate with foreign scientists, right? For scientists, they will say, well, why do I want to risk legal problem by collaborating? So according to the same American Physical Society survey, 1 in 5 physicists have either chosen or been directed to withdraw from international engagement. And that is bad for this country.
Thank you. And we'll now recognize Representative Ross for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman Foster and Chairwoman Stevens, for holding this hearing and for all the panelists for joining. I represent a district in North Carolina that includes much of the Research Triangle Park, which is the largest research park in the United States and a premier global innovation center that has been dependent on people from other countries and companies from other countries coming to North Carolina and finding a welcoming environment. Wake County, where I represent, is also the home to several world-class research institutions like NC State, doing groundbreaking research into clean energy, technology, more flexible and adaptive 5G network, and much more. And these research institutions benefit from the ingenuity and creativity of foreign-born individuals. At the same time, I know that the government has an obligation to ensure that our research enterprise is free from undue influence, but striking the balance is not an easy one. And it is important that we work together and include the private sector in how to implement guidelines to promote open science that do not discriminate against foreign collaborations. In July, I, along with 90 of my colleagues in the House and Senate, sent a letter to Attorney General Merrick Garland requesting an investigation into repeated wrongful targeting of individuals of Asian descent. And we asked the Attorney General to specifically review the China Initiative and see if it unfairly targets individuals based on their race and ethnicity. And I asked unanimous consent to enter the letter into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Dr. Shi, I'd like to hear just a little bit more about your career path. You shared quite a lot with Congressman Tonko that was very helpful, but I'd like to know, why did you want to come to the United States and become a citizen and raise your family here? What made this country attractive to you? You're on mute.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And as I said, we came to this country because America is indeed the best place to do science, and it's welcoming to foreigners. And of course, as I said, in this country, we all have the right to speak up for our own interest, and but of course, we also have the duty to participate in the democratic process. And I'm happy I made the decision because, as I said, our career really flourished. And I personally, I reached the level in my profession that I would never have imagined when I was, young in China. And so that's why, after my case, I really felt that we need to do something, because the three lessons that I learned from my case. One, DOJ charged somebody for crime. It's not necessarily true. What they said in my case was totally wrong. And two, Chinese scientists are being unfairly targeted. And number three, the routine academic activities are being criminalized. So when I saw, actually even today, most scientists are not aware of these problems. Now, of course, these facts were unimaginable to me before my case. And now I understand it. And I saw people still are not aware. And it's a big concern to me. So I was thinking, if I can help people to realize this problem, bring people to action, then my contribution to science will be much bigger than if I publish some more high impact journal papers. That's really my hope, that scientific community can speak up and tell the public and tell the policymakers about the fact, right? Because we have a lot of untruths flying around. like China sent 400,000 students to the U.S. to steal American technology. That's simply not true.
Well, Dr. Shi, thank you so much. I want to just ask a very quick question of Dr. Zuber about the China initiative. And I don't want to minimize the fact that there are bad actors out there who do want to steal our research. But I want to ask, with such a particular focus on one country, do you think we might be keeping our eye off the ball and not looking into some other countries that might be using the fact that we're focusing on China to engage in nefarious enterprises?
Yeah, I think looking more broadly would have some benefit. Certainly in the cyber area, without question, there are other serious players on that front that present a real risk.
Many thanks. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. And we'll now recognize Representative Casten for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses. I really appreciate having this hearing. And if you'll forgive me for a little bit of philosophizing, we have always had a challenge in our country, maybe in every country, between people who embrace change and people who are afraid of change. And that's been manifest in our immigration policy through the years. From Japanese internment camps to the Chinese Exclusion Act, we've certainly seen plenty of anti-Asian bias when Asians represented a form of change in the status quo. And of course, that's still ongoing. Last year, I had to organize a town hall after an Asian American constituent of mine was attacked and beaten on a run by people who felt empowered by the fact that the President of the United States was using racist terms to describe COVID. We are still dealing with that. So I'm glad we're having this hearing. That said, I want to focus on a different issue raised in this report that I feel has gotten too little attention, which is that academic institutions that are pushing the limits of knowledge, overturning existing paradigms, are also frightening to those who see their job as to stand athwart history yelling "stop," as the saying goes. And so as long as academic research and academic institutions are being politicized, there's also a risk of over-focus there. And in the specific report that was shared, of the 186 cases of theft or attempted theft that were identified in the EEA, only 3% of those were at academic or government research institutions. And the overwhelming majority of our conversation today has been about academia. And so, Dr. Zuber, I'd like to turn over to you. What are we missing in that other 97%? And let me just start with that, and then follow on.
Yeah, so it's puzzling to many of us why so much of the focus is on academia, when most of the cases, especially as relates to economic security, are not there. I think because the focus has been on non-traditional collectors and the spirit of openness in U.S. universities, but what are we missing? Well, in the 97%, industry doesn't have the same openness as universities do, and cyber theft is quite a big deal, and intellectual property theft as well in industry are also a big deal. So I would say that those are the two areas where we're obviously losing.
So if we focus on this solely in the sort of the more public ends of our research institutions, what does that do to academia? What does that do to the type of research that gets done, the people who do it, the quality of research?
Well, academia has to do its part to follow the rules, but ultimately in academia, academics want to be publishing things and getting information out to the world. So another effect of this is if we put a chill on academia, that's a loss of talent that's going to go out to these industries. So it's ultimately negatively affecting U.S. industry as well.
Well, I mean, clearly we want to protect U.S. intellectual property. I just have a concern that if we're ignoring 97% of the problem, we may be overburdening our resources in the wrong area. Did any of the other witnesses have any comments on that?
No, if I can, I can add a word. And, I think, you are absolutely right. Universities where our research is published, and there is no need for people to steal anything. They can just read journal publications. And for example, when asked about the reported Russian stealing of COVID research, the NIH director said, "I'm not exactly sure what serious risk is involved here. Mischief? Yes. Serious risk? I'm not sure." The former CIA director, John Deutsch, has said the risk of losing of technology to China is minor compared to the losses that will be incurred by restricting inquiry on university campuses. So that's why I was asking the question, are they catching the real spies?
That's an excellent question. I'm out of time, so we'll yield back, but really appreciate your thoughtful responses.
Thank you. And finally, we will recognize Representative Beyer for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. Question for Inspector General Lerner. You suggest in the testimony that one of your responsibilities is to work closely with the FBI on cases that may prevent conflict. When we listen to Professor Chi's concerns, not only his arrest, but a number of the other FBI cases that resulted in arrests that turned out not to be true, how confident are you that the FBI's going at this in the right way? Why are we continuing to get arrests of people who later turn out to have done nothing wrong?
I can't, unfortunately, speak to the specifics of those cases because our office wasn't engaged in them. I know we have done our and made many offers to work with the FBI to help them have a better understanding of the academic research environment and how to engage with that community. And we're happy to show them the approaches that we use that wherein we do our best to protect the privacy of the people that we're investigating during the course of those investigations, especially if ultimately it turns out that allegations are not substantiated.
Thank you. Dr. Zuber, I very much appreciated your testimony about finding the right balance. That my youngest graduated from Rice a few years ago, and I think most of her closest friends in her dorm were children born in China who'd come there to get their undergraduates and then their PhDs and stay. And we're getting wonderful job offers in the United States with no intention of going back. This wonderful reverse brain drain from China that serves the American public very well, and probably is not that helpful for China. How do we make sure that we keep our science open? And what percentage of all the research and work that they're doing really represents a national security threat to us if somehow it's work got into the hands of, say, the Communist Party in China?
So let me answer the questions of what can we do to encourage international individuals to stay in the U.S. after they've gotten their degree. So the first thing that we really need to do is that on our campuses, and we do open research, that we can't restrict university grants to participation only by U.S. citizens, and there's a move to do more and more of that. So imagine you have a situation where you've got a research group, but only the U.S. citizens can work on parts of it, and then it makes the non-U.S. citizens feel like second class. Okay, so if something is problematic, it shouldn't come to a university for research. Okay, with minor exceptions. The other thing that we can do is accelerate the green card for anybody who gets a PhD in a STEM field. So you get your diploma, you get a green card stapled to it or coming by, certainly, so that we make it clear that that we want these individuals to stay in the United States because for all the reasons that you've mentioned and that others have mentioned here. And the fraction that presents a national security concern, actually, I wouldn't begin to know the answer to that. So I think I better steer clear of that one.
Well, I'm saving my hardest question for Ms. Wright, because she's a GAO specialist, right? So you know everything about how government works. I've been hearing about the Staple Act for at least 25 years. Every Democrat and every Republican talks about why we want to keep these great new PhDs in our physical sciences here. How come we can't pass the equivalent of the Staple Act in the U.S. Congress?
Representative Beyer, I would have to say that that's something that I'm not familiar with and haven't looked at that in our work. But certainly with regard to some of the workforce issues, that GAO covers, there continues to be a growing need and an ever increasing need to make sure that we have the right STEM workforce in place to meet the challenges of our time. That might include, looking at not just talent here domestically, but certainly also taking into account, foreign talent that comes to our universities.
We might have to ask our chairman for a GAO report on why we can't get the Staple Act passed. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Beyer, and I can't avoid this opportunity to give a shout out to an act that we've been introducing for the last several Congresses, I believe, the Keep STEM Talent Act, to basically staple a green card to PhD diplomas. And before we bring this hearing to a close, I want to thank our witnesses for testifying before the committee today, and to thank our committee members on both sides of the aisle for their thoughtful questions on this complex issue. I'd also like to echo our special gratitude to Dr. Shi for, despite his experiences and those of his family, for his continuing commitment to making our scientific enterprise and our country a better, more secure, more just, transparent, and a more welcoming place for researchers from around the world. And as someone whose wife is a first-generation Korean American and a PhD physicist, I personally appreciate your integrity and courage. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional statements from members and for any additional questions the committee may ask of the witnesses. The witnesses are excused and the hearing is now adjourned.